I date my conversion to the 19th of November, 1988, when I heard about Medjugorje. So I believed it wholeheartedly from then on. My name is Father Leon Pereira. I am a Dominican from the English province, and I am originally from Singapore. This is where I grew up. And then I spent the most of my life in the United Kingdom. I remember I first heard about Medjugorje when I was 12 years old, in 1983, in a book. It was a book on extraordinary phenomena. You know, I think chapter 1 was UFOs, chapter 2 was poltergeist, and chapter 3 was Medjugorje. So that's where I first heard about Medjugorje. And I told my family, but no one was interested. Or they just said, oh, yes, you know. So, you know, growing up in Singapore and also from an Indian family, my grandparents moved to Singapore in the 1930s. So Indian Catholics tend to be very devout, very traditional, I suppose, very Herzegovinian in many ways. We prayed the rosary as a family every day, every evening before the meal. I remember in Lent, we had to fast every day in Lent. Or maybe that was the grown-ups. Maybe I was allowed not to fast because I was too young. We had all those things, but I still sort of lapsed from the faith. The Catholic faith didn't make any sense to me. No one ever explained it to me. So when I was 17, I lapsed a little bit from the faith. I was spending time with these Protestants, these evangelicals. And I enjoyed praying with them. We did praise and worship, you know. But there was no real content there. It was emotions. The emotions were satisfied, but not the intellect. And so I spent a year with them, and I was still very dissatisfied. And I left them, and they had tried to turn me against Our Lady, which they succeeded to a great extent, against the Eucharist, that they didn't succeed. And also they attacked the Pope, etc., the Holy Father. And to a great extent they succeeded, but I left them anyway. And around August that year, 1988, it was the Marian year. At the end of that year, 15th of August, there was a big rally in one of the stadiums in Singapore. So about 100,000 Catholics were descending on the stadium, and my mother wanted to go. And she told me to go with her. I said to my mother, I don't believe in Our Lady. And she looked at me with this look, and she said, I don't care. She believes in you. You're coming. So she took me to this big rally. And we went there, and everyone was praying the rosary. And, you know, in my mind, I was a bit like a Protestant already. So I looked at all of them, and I was thinking, oh, you poor, deluded people, superstitious, muttering your rosary beads when you could be like me and pray to God directly. It's very arrogant. That was August 15th. And in November, you know, the school year in Singapore, because we're right near the equator, it runs from January to November. And from middle of November onwards, you're free. And December is totally off. It's great. So one of my best friend at the time, he was a Methodist. And he said to me, look, there's this talk on this funny place in Yugoslavia, Medjugorje. and he said, Mary is appearing there. Do you want to go? So when he said the name, I mispronounced the name, I already knew. But I was thinking, why is this Protestant interested? So out of curiosity about him, I went with him to this talk. And I remember listening to that talk. It was given by a couple, Victor and Vivian Wee. Victor is a doctor, and his wife, Vivian, they came here maybe 1984, 85, around that period. And they came back to Singapore, and they started to evangelize and kept talking about Medjugorje. And as a result, you see, Medjugorje rejuvenated the church in Singapore. And every parish started to introduce perpetual adoration. And the rosary started to make a comeback. It was revived. And it was all because of this funny place in Yugoslavia, Medjugorje. And so I went to the talk, and by Dr. Victor and Vivian Wee. And when I heard what they had to say, I believed it straight away. And I believed it especially the way they spoke about the Eucharist and Holy Mass. And basically they talked about the 5 stones, and fasting. And from that day onwards, I date my conversion to that. I started to fast and to pray the rosary and monthly confession. Maybe before that I would have gone to confession, I think, once a year, 2-3 times a year maybe. But after that, we started to go monthly because our mother was asking for this. So I date my conversion to the 19th of November, 1988, when I heard about Medjugorje. So I believed it wholeheartedly from then on. You see, my conversion was when I was 17. At 18, we finished high school. And as soon, when you are a boy, you are not allowed to leave the country. If you're in your late teens, say from 14, 15, 16, around that age, you're not allowed to leave the country easily because we have national service, military service for 2.5 years. So they think, we might run away and never come back. So I couldn't come to Medjugorje when I believed in Medjugorje. I had to wait till I joined the army. And once you're in the army, then they're not so afraid that you might run away. So I was in the army, and during training, I had an accident. I broke my spine in 2 places. All sorts of terrible things happened. It's a long story. But and then I had an operation, and I took another year to recover. So by the time I was recovering, when I was recovering, I remember in my parish, in the youth group, someone said to me, well, why don't you go to Medjugorje now? You're free to go if you want to. And I thought, wow, yeah, maybe I could. But, obviously I didn't have the money at that time. So I suggested it to my parents, and they thought it was a great idea. They wanted to come in Thanksgiving, that I could walk, that I wasn't paralyzed. So we came in September 1991. And I have to admit, we did not know very much of what was going on here. The war had started. Croatia and Slovenia had broken off. There was already trouble. I think Vukovar had not yet happened, but almost. I remember how people looked, the kind of dread in people's eyes everywhere. So when we came, we had to land in Beograd and then get on a bus. We got to Medjugorje just in the evening, and the sun was setting. And before we even got off the bus, my mother was leading the whole bus, looking at the sun, saying, look, it's the miracle of the sun. And actually, I remember looking briefly, and there was a lot of gold in the sky, and maybe the miracle of the sun was taking place. But I remembered thinking, no, don't look, this is putting the Lord to the test. So I refused to look. I didn't. But in those days also, I remember, these sort of things seemed to be more common. I remember rosaries seemed to turn to gold all the time, and smell of roses, and miracle of the sun, and there are all sorts of things. And the cross on Križevac would change shape or disappear sometimes, or turn into like a glowing ball or rotate. All sorts of things used to happen. And what struck me at the time, I remember, was that none of the villagers seemed to be excited by signs and wonders. None of them were running after these things. But the deepest impression that it made on me was the evening program. Because in those days, everyone came to the evening program. Everyone. Because every family, the head of the family is Baka or Baba, grandmother, granny. And in those days, the Babas all wore black, if they were widows, with the black headscarf. And they were supremely powerful. Baba would say, we're all going to the evening program, the family and the pilgrims. No one had a choice. So we all came down, And I think that made a huge impression on me, to see everyone in the village praying the rosary together and then celebrating the Holy Mass, and then afterwards adoration. And you could see, they had so many worries, but they prayed. On fasting days, Wednesday and Friday, again, Baba would give us a plastic bag with water and bread in it and say, here you go up the mountain, pray your krunitsa, get out. That was it. So we did. This kind of pilgrimage, it really shapes you the way Our Lady was leading the village herself. So as a result of coming to Medjugorje, a seed was sown of a vocation. And I was going to Mass every day from the military base where I was based. Because I was injured, I was allowed to go home every evening. And instead of going home, I would go to the church. So home was one direction, I'd go the other direction to get to the church for Mass at 6 o'clock in the evening, and then go home. And I remembered, on the days that I couldn't go, I'd get very upset. And on the days when I was late, I would run, and I didn't have any peace until I got to the church. And when I did that, I remember thinking, what is going on here? So I thought, okay, I obviously like being in church. Priests live in church. Maybe I should become a priest. And this was my syllogism. So I thought about it, and I even broached the topic with my parents, but they were dead set against it. And even at the time, I remembered thinking what Jesus said, whoever loves father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. But after a few months, with no support from my family, I felt I couldn't do it. So when I finished my military service, I went to England to medical school, and went to university in Leeds, in Yorkshire, in the north of England. So I was studying medicine, and I thought I'd put all thoughts of priesthood out of my mind. But while I was there, there was like a deep unease. It never left. And also I was always thinking about Medjugorje. I had a dream one day which disturbed me so much that I started to think about the priesthood again. And when I did think about the priesthood, I felt a great peace. So from university, we used to go to a Benedictine monastery in the north of Yorkshire, a place called Ampleforth. I was talking to one of the monks, and he just said to me, do you know, you are a Dominican? And I said, what is a Dominican? And he said, go off and find out. And at the time, I just knew Dominicans were something like Franciscans, but less glamorous. That's what I thought. And I didn't pay too much attention to him. But 6 months later, a friend of mine, she graduated from university early because she did French and Spanish, so she finished much sooner than me. And she went off to South America, volunteered with the Jesuits, and then came back. And we met for a drink in a pub. And she was talking about her Dominican friends. And I said, do you mean Dominican Republic? And she said, no, Dominican friars. And she said, you have to meet them. So because I told her what this monk had told me. And she said, you have to meet them. So she gave me a contact. Now, in those days, emails existed, but not everyone had emails. So I had to write a letter the old-fashioned way to this friar in Glasgow, in Scotland. And he wrote back a beautiful reply, and he said, come and stay, come and see. So I went, and I stayed with the Dominicans, and I loved it. I joined the order in 1998 on the 14th of September. That's when I was clothed in the habit. I started to come again to Medjugorje in 2009. So there's an 18-year gap from the first visit to the second visit. And then 2010 onwards, I realized, look, from England, you can go to Medjugorje so easily. So I started to come 3-4 times a year. And then in 2015, in May, I heard that Father Kevin, who was the chaplain here for the English speakers, that he was retiring. And someone told me, there's a list somewhere and you should sign up. I think the 12th of May, they told me this. On the 13th of May, Our Lady of Fatima, I was hearing confessions, and I saw a group of Dominicans walking by, a summa of Dominicans, the collective noun for a Dominican, a summa of Dominicans, 12 of them, and they were from Zagreb. So I ran after them, just to say hello. And from the other side was coming Father Marinko, the parish priest, the pastor. And he was coming, bracho, brothers. And then he saw me, and I clearly don't look like I come from Zagreb, maybe Ljubuški. And then, so he said, you, Father, you come here many times, yes? I'm sorry, I have to do the accent. So I said, yes, I do. And he said, you come with me. So he took me into the office. Father Marinko just asked me a few questions, like what I thought was good about Medjugorje. I said the evening program and adoration. He asked what I thought Medjugorje needed. I said 24-hour adoration chapel. And then he asked me what languages I spoke. I told him. And then he said, good, you can go now, go. But I didn't realize this was an interview. So, and then as a result of this conversation, later on he asked me, he said, we'd like you to come and be chaplain here. Medjugorje is different. I often hear from people outside or even on YouTube, these priests who are, or priests and lay people who are against Medjugorje. They say, well, no, every place has the sacraments, and they try to minimize Medjugorje and say, yeah, they went there and they had a good spiritual experience, but that's it. It's nothing extraordinary. I think if that was so, then why is this not happening all around the world? Why is it here in Medjugorje? Okay, back home in England, if I heard someone tell me they haven't been to confession in 30 years, 40 years, I'd be astonished. But here in Medjugorje, I hear 50 years, that's normal. My record is 63 years that they haven't been, and now you can't conclude from that therefore people in Medjugorje are worse than outsiders. They're more likely to confess here for some reason. Lourdes, I've gone to Lourdes so many times, I do not remember confession figuring so much in the pilgrimage experience there. Hopefully most of the pilgrims would have gone at least once to confession there, and also for us priests, I only remember volunteering once when I found out, you could volunteer to hear confessions. But that was as a result of coming to Medjugorje and knowing that, of course, here you can volunteer and help hear confessions. Something is different here. Something is different with adoration and with confessions. With adoration, one evening, I was sat in the rotunda where the priests sit, for adoration, and there was an African priest next to me, and the people were all outside, and I think the benches, if they're all full, it's about 7,000 people. But if there's an overspill and there are people on the grass as well, I think it's probably roughly 10,000. 10,000 people adoring in silence. You could have heard a pin drop. That sort of silence. And this African priest whispered to me, now I believe Medjugorje is real. For him, that was the proof. And something is happening. Otherwise, these conversions should be happening all over the world. I wish they happened all over the world. But Medjugorje is not just a feeling. I don't think you can have Medjugorje without Gospa, without Our Lady. You cannot divorce the Mother of God from Medjugorje. You cannot pretend Medjugorje is just a spiritual place or a spiritual shrine, and it's a place for the sacraments, full stop. If you don't add, thanks to the Mother of God, without that, there is no Medjugorje.